if listing themes in one sentence is bad, what do you mean if? It definitely is, right? I'm being facetious there, but it actually is. There is no if to that. Listing themes in any sentence is horrible. It's not even bad. How would we list all our themes? You don't list your themes. It's almost a paradox here. If listing is bad, how will we list all of our themes? Well, if listing any themes is bad, you definitely never list all of them without going off on a tangent. Essentially, how would we concisely state the themes while still giving detail? Look, I understand your question. It's a good question. You never list, you're basically going to list them out through each sentence. So if your introduction is about 4 sentence introduction, then the list is in the 3 sentences after your thesis. So lead with a strong thesis that speaks to your overall idea, right? So you lead with a thesis statement as the first sentence of your intro that breaks down the questions, that speaks to the fundamental tension that you are exploring in the text or module. The next sentence will then introduce your first theme or idea, but it will do it over that whole sentence, and it will also include context and or some aspect of form because you're introducing these core elements as well. And you might also allude to a key plot element, right? You don't want to story tell, but you include some reference to a key character or what their general struggle is, right? You still want to locate your essay within the confines of this narrative. And then in the next sentence, so your third sentence, you can foreground or signpost, as some people say, the second body paragraph idea. And then in your last sentence for the introduction, you can signpost or foreground or foreshadow the issue or idea that you're going to talk about in the last body paragraph. So your intro functions as a kind of preview, but you don't list any themes within one sentence. Instead, you do a preview of each idea in one sentence each, while also including some of the other general elements that you want to introduce in an introduction. Do you have any structure that you always use to make a really good introduction? Well, funnily enough, I just kind of gave you one. I have a thesis statement, and then I introduce the 3 body paragraph points one after another, but I don't just do that. Otherwise, you're almost repeating the topic sentences, or rather, the topic sentences will be repetitive. I never frame them in exactly the same way as the topic sentence, of course, to avoid being repetitive, but I also merge in context, form, and some plot elements into that intro as well. But I'm basically previewing each core idea of my essay in order while incorporating some other elements into those last 3 sentences. The first one is going to be my big thesis statement, where I basically just speak to the fundamental tension or complexity that is being explored, that ideally I'll be able to adapt to any kind of question. In terms of the conclusion, for your essay conclusions, a lot of people get this confused and they just repeat the thesis, which doesn't make much sense. The conclusion is saying, given that you've read my essay and I've gone through this whole argument, now I'm going to tell you how the responder is going to be impacted going forward. Let me leave you with a thought. Let me leave you with the final intent of the composer. So let's say you've talked about a play and you get to the very end of it and you say, ultimately, the composer invites you, don't say the word you, but invites the responder to consider something about the concept they were talking about going forward. So it's got to leave you with a thought that is to do with how we as the responder should be impacted by this study, okay? You've introduced the core ideas, you've explained them in your essay. What are we left with? What are we left to think about? If you guys can just think about that for the conclusion, what does the composer ultimately leave us to think about? That's a slightly different frame to establishing the tension as your thesis statement. So don't repeat your thesis statement. Think about what's the final impact on the responder. How does the composer want us to think critically now that we have been exposed to all of that analysis? Okay, so that's the frame of the conclusion.